I was 75 when I learned the difference between getting older and being hunted. At my birthday party, between the string quartet and the clinking glasses, I heard my daughter-in-law murmur, "I hope this is her last one," as though I were a cake candle to be pinched out. I stood in a house I had designed 40 years earlier, a place that knew my footsteps and felt it tilt beneath me. Age, I thought. Then I heard my son, my only child, answer, with a calmness that stung more than any slap. The doctor said my heart would not last much longer, and when it did not, everything would finally be theirs. I smiled at the guests, raised a glass, and quietly began to count the exits. They had chosen my son's study as their whispering place, a room paneled in walnut that I had once oiled with my own hands. Their voices reached me from the hallway, Rebecca all bright laughter and champagne light. James steadier, working the arithmetic of inheritance with professional detachment. I had been an architect for 50 years. I knew load and stress and points of failure. I also knew the danger of emotion when a structure starts to crack. So I did what I had done in boardrooms full of men who doubted me. I arranged my face into composure, returned to my party, accepted kisses from old colleagues, and waited until the last car drifted down the drive. By morning, the house sounded like a museum, distant, polished, and empty. Outside, James and Rebecca left in their careful routine, and my longtime housekeeper Martha carried in a breakfast tray as she had for 3 decades. My legs felt heavy again, another of the strange symptoms that had risen since my sister Elaine died 3 years earlier. Yet clarity sliced through the fog. "Martha," I said, "I need to tell you something terrible, and I need your help." She set the tray down with the soft certainty of a woman who has seen much and judged little. I told her everything. She listened, then nodded, and reached into her apron for a small notebook. She had noticed the pills changing, she whispered. The labels and the contents did not match. She had been keeping notes for months. Fear did not vanish then, but it acquired a border. We used an untraceable phone Martha had acquired to call Dr. Leonard, my physician, of 20 years before James convinced me to consolidate care with his chosen specialist. Leonard examined me in a discreet office across town. He tested my heart, which thumped along like an old but trustworthy engine, then studied my tremors and brief spells of confusion. They were not the work of age, he said quietly, but consistent with anticholinergic toxicity and benzodiazepine overdose. My body felt both heavy and oddly light, the way a building does when scaffolding is torn off, and the skeleton stands bare to the wind. Reporting was necessary, he warned. Not yet, I asked. 3 weeks to secure protection. He agreed reluctantly and told me to keep breathing. That night, James stood over my bed with a glass of water and the small oval pills he had been bringing with filial diligence. He watched me swallow. He praised my compliance. He kissed my forehead as if rehearsing for eulogies. I thought of my late husband, brilliant with holding, perpetually irritated by my success, and of the shadow that resentment casts on a boy. Then, when the door closed, I spat the tablets into a tissue and slid them into the hollowed center of an old architectural history book. Architects collect evidence, angles, weights, forces. I would collect mine in the vocabulary my son had chosen. The next call felt like opening a sealed room. Victor Morales answered with the same grounded baritone I remembered from decades ago when we were young and ruthless about ideas. "It's Caroline," I said. "I need your help." And there is something about the urban hub concept you'll want to hear. Silence stretched, and in it the ghosts of what we had not become. "Then I'm listening." Victor did not ask me to explain myself into fragility. He asked what I needed first. Discretion, a private investigator, a firewall between my life and the 2 people planning to end it. He promised all 3 before I could finish describing the symptoms. During the next weeks, the house became a stage set with invisible cameras, tiny eyes hidden in fixtures. I had designed discrete microphones woven into an obsolete intercom, a security architecture only its original architect could draw. Martha and I performed our roles. I grew frail when observed, and steadier when the lights dimmed. She ferried legitimate prescriptions from Dr. Leonard, slipped the poisoned ones into evidence bags, and cataloged everything with a librarian's precision. The investigator Victor hired, Michael Donovan, met us during supposed physical therapy sessions. He was an ex-Boston detective with the restless shoulders of a man who believes in paperwork more than speeches. "They're methodical," he said after our third meeting, sliding financial printouts across a dashboard. Small transfers had become larger ones, all moving from my accounts toward offshore shadows. He showed me a pattern as clean and damning as a truss: the doctor, the son, the wife. I studied the numbers like a blueprint. "And Rebecca?" I asked. He hesitated, then handed me a folder. Photos of her with a man I did not recognize, heads tipped together over property valuations and blueprints of my home. A real estate broker known for rapid flips and discreet deals. Notes from an old investigation in Boston elder financial abuse that evaporated when the victim died before charges could form. My throat tightened. My grip steadied. I had given Rebecca Pearl's kindness entry. She had given me timelines. At night, when the house exhaled and even the cameras seemed to blink slower, I sketched not a building, but a trap disguised as a future. Rushing collapses structures. I would design something that could stand. First, a transfer of my residence to a foundation for young architects, airtight and public when I chose to reveal it. Second, a resurrection of the Urban Hub project, the work that had once made my husband jealous and my son small. Third, a confrontation calibrated like a reveal, where their own hands would pull back the curtain. I was still wobbly some mornings. Words still vanished occasionally, like sparrows startled from a wire. But a design is not the sum of its tremors. It is the clarity beneath them. James knocked on my door one afternoon with a new pill, faintly green, a circulation supplement from his trusted specialist. I lifted the glass, swallowed convincingly, and tasted the bitterness of endings. When he left, I bagged the tablet, labeled it, and texted Michael with a code we had agreed upon. He replied within the hour, faster damage, same intention. Outside my window, winter sunlight lit the cornices I had once sketched on napkins. Inside, I counted my breaths slow and even, and imagined the sound of a room when the truth walks in wearing its real name. On March mornings, when frost clung to the iron gates of my estate, I practiced being fragile. My son believed he was watching me fade. What he was really watching was an architect rehearse an illusion. He leaned closer now, eyes searching for proof that his plan was progressing. I spilled water with trembling hands, murmured about confused dreams, and let him believe. But when the door shut, I walked the length of my studio in steady strides, lungs pulling in air that tasted like defiance. Beneath the drafting table lay evidence bottles, pills, notebooks. My blueprint of survival was nearly complete. Victor remained my unseen scaffolding. Each evening, through secure calls routed by Michael, he asked not about weakness, but about progress. "The Carrington Group is still interested," he said one night, his voice rich with both business and history. "They think the Urban Hub could redefine sustainable living." I closed my eyes, remembering the early sketches we once spread across cafe tables, all light and ambition. Now those same plans would be my rebirth and my son's undoing. If James wanted my death to finance his development dreams, he would discover instead that my life still had projects larger than his imagination. The attorney Victor introduced, Richard Anderson, was as sharp as the chisels once used to carve cornices. He specialized in elder law, But when I laid out the documents, recordings, and evidence Martha and Michael had gathered, he looked at me not as a client to be pitied, but as a strategist equal to himself. "This is more than financial abuse," he said gravely. "It edges into attempted homicide." I nodded, calm as stone. "Not edges. It lands squarely." His instinct was to rush to court, but I stopped him. My son was well connected, and half measures would only drive him to act faster. What I needed was a design airtight enough that no storm could topple it. Martha worked beside me as though she had been preparing all her life for this role. She cataloged medications, monitored my strength, and reminded me to eat when obsession made me forget. One afternoon, she confessed that James and Rebecca had been paying her extra to report on my confusion. She had fed them precisely what they wanted to hear, buying us precious time. I squeezed her hand, remembering the scholarship I had created for her daughter after her husband's death. Some debts in life circle back when you most need them. By April, my foundation papers were nearly complete. The Weber Foundation for Young Architects would own my residence, preserving it as a study center long after my own footsteps were gone. James and Rebecca would never know until it was too late to contest. Meanwhile, Michael's quiet surveillance uncovered their increasing desperation. Financial statements revealed more than $2 million siphoned. Recordings caught James discussing dosages with Dr. Harrison, carefully calibrating my decline. Each detail layered itself into the structure of my case, like steel rebar inside concrete. It was Rebecca, ironically, who proposed the stage for their own exposure. She appeared in my studio with a practiced smile, suggesting a dinner at the Palmer Club to honor the anniversary of my first commission. I feigned gratitude, masking the quiet elation that thrummed in my chest. Here was the stage, gilded and public, where masks could finally be removed. "May 15th, she said. "Perfect." I nodded, hands trembling with the kind of anticipation that felt almost like joy. As the date neared, Victor helped me prepare not just legally, but physically. In his penthouse, far from my son's watchful eyes, I tried on clothing that declared strength instead of weakness. We settled on a crimson dress, bold as a flare with clean architectural lines. My hair was cut into a sleek bob, no longer the soft grandmotherly style James insisted I keep. "They won't recognize you," Victor said, watching me steady myself in modest heels. "Good," I replied. "They shouldn't." For months, I had been a shadow fading. On May 15th, I would step into the light. Elizabeth Chen, a rising prosecutor whose mother had once worked with me, agreed to attend the dinner with her team. Plainclothes officers would position themselves discreetly, not for arrests yet, but to ensure order. Elizabeth reviewed the portfolio we had prepared: financial forensics, medical evidence, surveillance transcripts, enough to begin proceedings. "The wheels of justice move slowly," she warned. "But with this, they will move." I told her architects understand patience. Foundations laid carefully last longer than those poured in haste. The evening of May 15th arrived. At the Palmer Club, chandeliers blazed, glasses clinked, and guests gathered to celebrate what they believed was another step in my decline. James and Rebecca stood at the entrance, radiant in the spoils they already counted as theirs. I arrived deliberately late on Victor's arm, the room falling silent as I entered. Eyes widened. Whispers spread. The frail woman they had pitied now stood tall, her silver hair gleaming, her presence commanding. James blinked as though facing a ghost. "Mother," he stammered. I smiled coolly. "Thank you for hosting this lovely event." Throughout the dinner, I let him stew in confusion. He announced his promotion to partner at Westridge Development, his voice filled with triumph. Applause followed, polite but distracted, as all eyes kept flicking back to me. When dessert arrived, I tapped my glass lightly. The room hushed. "I too have an announcement," I said. With a signal, Victor opened the doors and the Carrington executives entered, portfolios in hand. I am pleased to announce the official launch of the Urban Hub project, a $120 million renewal that will reshape our city. And equally, the creation of the Weber Foundation for Young Architects, which now owns my residence. I watched Rebecca's hand freeze around her glass, James's face drain of color. Then Elizabeth Chen stepped forward. Calmly, she presented legal documents investigations into financial fraud, medical manipulation conspiracy. James sputtered, insisting I was confused, urging the room to consult Dr. Harrison. Elizabeth's voice cut clean. Dr. Harrison is currently being questioned by the medical board. Rebecca tried to distance herself, claiming ignorance, but transcripts contradicted her neatly. Guests began to file out, uncomfortable but riveted. The Carrington team remained beside me, their support a fortress. When the room thinned, James tried one last tactic. "Mother, you're unwell. Let's speak tomorrow when you've rested." I met his gaze steadily. "I have never been clearer." Officers moved subtly toward the exits, their presence undeniable. For the first time, I saw panic flicker in his eyes, then rage, then something that looked like recognition of defeat. My son, my only child, who had once built towers of blocks at my feet, was now a man unmasked as my would-be executioner. In the weeks after the Palmer Club dinner, silence echoed louder than applause ever had. My son's career disintegrated with remarkable speed, like a tower built on faulty ground. Westridge Development withdrew their partnership offer once whispers of investigation reached their boardroom. Rebecca retreated to her sister's house in Milwaukee, while James remained in Chicago, unraveling under scrutiny. The newspapers called it the Weber case. But for me, it was simply survival, reshaped into structure. Elizabeth Chen pressed forward with a prosecutor's patience. By July, she showed me lab results that left no doubt Dr. Harrison had orchestrated a chemical slow-death prescribing combinations intended to mimic dementia and heart failure. 3 other wealthy patients, all with sudden declines, appeared in his history. "We're building a stronger case than I imagined possible," she told me, her tone both grim and proud. My accounts had been frozen mid-theft, over $2 million safeguarded before disappearing into offshore mist. Watching the reports, I felt no shock anymore, only the quiet confirmation of what my instincts had told me months before. My son had not simply betrayed me, he had weaponized love itself, the bond of mother and child, turning it into leverage for his own ambition. The Carrington team became a second family. They praised the Urban Hub designs, marveling that after months of poisoning tremors and fatigue, my creative vision remained sharp. "Your return to active practice is a major event," Howard Carrington said one afternoon as we spread blueprints across a glass table. "This project will change the city." His words lit something inside me, not vanity, but a sense of reclamation. For years, my identity had been shrinking to the size of a pill bottle. Now it expanded again into steel and glass plazas and courtyard systems designed to sustain human flourishing. One evening that summer, I returned to Victor's penthouse where I had been living quietly to find James waiting in the lobby. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his confidence dissolved. The doorman looked uneasy, but I motioned him aside. "It's all right, Henry. We'll talk here." James tried to summon his old authority, calling me mother, with a sharpness meant to reclaim control. But his arguments fell flat under the weight of evidence. I told him calmly that I had seen the texts, heard the recordings, collected the pills he thought I swallowed. His face paled. He asked what I wanted. "Money." The house. I told him I wanted nothing. "That's what you never understood. You could have had everything by simply being the son I thought you were." For a moment, I glimpsed the boy he had been, lonely, desperate for approval, but it vanished beneath the man he had chosen to become. "We're not family anymore," I told him. "We're plaintiff and defendant." He flinched, as though struck. By autumn, Elizabeth presented plea deals. James faced 8 years for elder abuse fraud and attempted assault. Rebecca would serve 3 eligible for parole halfway. Dr. Harrison received 6 years and the end of his medical license. The alternatives were lengthy trials with uncertain outcomes. I studied the documents with an architect's eye. A plea meant consequences without the long spectacle of court sparing me the defense's inevitable attacks on my mental competence. Foundations matter more than facades, I told Elizabeth. I agreed to the deals not out of mercy, but practicality. Justice is not always elegant, but it must hold. When winter came, transformation touched more than law. My home, once a stage for poison, opened its doors as the Weber Foundation for Young Architects. Reporters gathered in January as I cut the ribbon alongside Martha, no longer my housekeeper, but now the foundation's administrative director. 20 scholarship students stood behind us, their faces lit with possibility. Architecture has always been about transformation, I told the crowd. This house was once my private residence. Then it became a battleground. Today, it becomes a legacy. Cameras flashed, but what mattered were the young voices chattering about their projects, already sketching futures larger than any single life. That spring, Urban Hub broke ground. At 76, I found myself again at the center of architectural circles, not as a relic, but as a visionary. I stood in rooms with investors, planners, and sustainability experts, my hands still trembling at times, but my mind sharp. Victor remained beside me, our partnership redefined by time. Not romance, not nostalgia, but respect deep enough to hold silence comfortably. "You're quiet tonight," he said once as we looked over Lake Michigan from his terrace. "I'm thinking about what comes next," I answered. The poisoning had left its scars, tremors, occasional lapses reduced stamina, but those limitations forced new creativity. I learned to design around fragility without losing beauty. Perhaps that was the truest lesson architecture ever gave me. 1 year after the Palmer Club confrontation, I visited James in prison. He looked older, smaller, stripped of arrogance. "Why are you here?" he asked, confusion creasing his face. I told him I wanted to understand not just what he had done, but why. He admitted it had begun as genuine help after Elaine's death, then shifted when he realized how easily I surrendered control. It felt like power, for the first time, he said. Then Rebecca saw opportunity, and the spiral deepened. He confessed the last pill regimen had been intended to end me within 3 months. He said it without drama, as though discussing blueprints. I listened not with fury, but with pity. He had mistaken exploitation for strength, impatience for inheritance. "Some buildings can't be salvaged," I told him at last. "They can only be studied as ruins and left behind." 2 years later, as the second phase of Urban Hub launched, I hosted friends, colleagues, and foundation students at my new lakeside home. Modern steel and glass framed the lake and skyline, every detail designed for both beauty and the occasional limitations of my body. Victor joined us. Martha and her daughter stood proudly. Elizabeth, now a federal judge, smiled with satisfaction, and the Carrington team toasted the future. Reporters asked about my son, about regret, about legacy. I answered with clarity. Today isn't about destruction, it's about creation. My life had been nearly stolen, but from that fracture, I had built something enduring. That night, after the last guests left, Victor and I sat in quiet moonlight pooling across the lake. He asked if I had any regrets. I considered carefully, feeling the tremor still in my hand, the fatigue that arrived earlier each evening. "Only that I didn't make the call to you sooner," I said honestly. He smiled, reaching for my hand. "We have now, and we're making good use of it." I looked out at the skyline, at buildings I had designed decades ago, standing beside new towers, and understood the truth that had saved me. it is never too late to redesign your life. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, what would you rebuild if given a second chance?